Is life common across the universe? That depends on something we still do not quite understand. But we just found all 5 building blocks of DNA in space. And that changes everything, especially if you're looking for life beyond Earth. To understand why this matters, we need to step back and look at one of the deepest questions in science. How did life begin? Every living organism on Earth is built on a very specific molecular system. At the core of that system is DNA, or in simple cases, RNA. And both of these rely on a small set of molecules. These molecules are not just part of life. They are what allow life to store and transmit information. It's like biology's alphabet. The fundamental question is, did these molecules originate on Earth, or were they already present in the astrophysical environment before life as we know it even began? This question has been around for decades, and surprisingly, we've had partial answers for a long time. Back in 1969, a meteorite fell in Australia, known as the Murchison meteorite. It became one of the most studied extraterrestrial samples in history. When it was analyzed, we discovered amino acids, organic compounds, and nucleobases like adenine and guanine. This was a huge moment because it suggested that space chemistry could naturally produce molecules related to life. But there was a problem that the scientific community was discussing: contamination. Once a meteorite lands on Earth, it is immediately exposed to the environment. Microorganisms, water, atmospheric chemistry, everything. So even if you detect something like adenine, how do you know it didn't come from Earth itself? Over the years, scientists developed more sophisticated techniques to address this. One of the most important tools they use is something called isotopic analysis. They looked at isotopic ratios, especially carbon-13 and nitrogen-15. Molecules formed in space often carry isotopic signatures that are very different from those produced by biology on Earth. To understand this, we need a quick detour. Atoms of the same element can come in slightly different forms called isotopes. They have the same number of protons, which defines the element, but different numbers of neutrons. Take carbon for example. Most carbon atoms are carbon-12 with 6 protons and 6 neutrons, but a small fraction are carbon-13 with 1 extra neutron. Chemically, they behave almost the same. They form the same molecules, but physically they are slightly different in mass. And that tiny difference turns out to be extremely important because different processes in nature don't treat these isotopes equally. Biological systems, for example, tend to prefer lighter isotopes. Enzymes discriminate ever so slightly, favoring carbon-12 over carbon-13. So molecules produced by life on Earth end up with a characteristic isotopic ratio, a kind of a chemical fingerprint. But in space, chemistry follows a different path. In interstellar clouds, cold environments, and in primitive asteroids, chemical reactions follow different pathways. There are no enzymes, no biology, just physics and chemistry. And under those conditions, molecules often become enriched in heavier isotopes like carbon-13 and nitrogen-15. So scientists, when analyze a molecule from a meteorite or an asteroid, they don't just ask what molecule is this, they also ask what is the ratio of its isotopes. If that ratio matches what we expect from biology on Earth, contamination is a real possibility. But if the ratio is significantly different, especially enriched in heavier isotopes, then it becomes very hard to explain that molecule as coming from Earth. In many cases, including these nucleobases, that's exactly what we see. They carry isotopic signatures that are inconsistent with biological process on Earth, but coherent with formation in extraterrestrial environments. In other words, the atoms themselves carry like a memory of where they came from. But still, there's always a residual doubt. Not enough to dismiss the findings, but enough to keep the question open. Then things started to change with space missions. In 2020, the Japanese mission Hayabusa 2 returned samples from an asteroid called Ryugu. These samples were collected directly in space, sealed, and brought back to Earth without ever being exposed to the biosphere. This was a major breakthrough. For the first time, we had access to pristine asteroid material. When we first analyzed Ryugu, uracil was detected. Just one nucleobase, I know, but in a sample that could not have been contaminated. That alone was already extremely exciting. But then in 2025, NASA's OSIRIS-REx mission returned samples from another asteroid, Bennu. Those samples revealed a rich organic chemistry including multiple nucleobases and a wide variety of nitrogen-containing compounds. At that point, the picture was becoming clearer. These molecules were not rare. They seemed to form naturally in different environments across the solar system. For life as we know it, you need all canonical nucleobases together. And until now, we had never clearly seen all 5 together in space. In 2026, a new study was published analyzing additional samples from Ryugu using improved techniques and a larger amount of material. This time, we found something remarkable. All 5 nucleobases, the complete set used in DNA and RNA, not just detected once, but confirmed using multiple independent analytical methods, including high-resolution mass spectrometry and cross-validation techniques. Even more importantly, these molecules showed isotopic signatures that strongly indicate an extraterrestrial origin. It's not just that the molecules were found, it's that they were found in a material that has never been part of Earth's environment, analyzed with methods that leave very little room for alternative explanations. This is as close as we get in science to saying that these molecules are genuinely formed in space. I know it might be tempting to jump to a big conclusion. If all the building blocks of DNA exist in asteroids, does that mean life is common in the universe? Calm down, because the answer is no. Even with all 5 nucleobases, you still don't have DNA. DNA is not just a collection of molecules, it's a very specific structure. Each nucleobase has to be attached to a sugar molecule, forming a nucleoside that has to be connected to a phosphate group, forming a nucleotide. And then those nucleotides have to link together through a phosphodiester bond to form a chain. And these reactions are not trivial. In fact, many of them are chemically unfavorable in water. So the same environment that allows life to exist also tends to break these molecules apart rather than assemble them. So even if you have all the ingredients in the same place, they don't automatically assemble into DNA. And even if they did, well, that still wouldn't be enough. DNA is not just a polymer, it's an information-carrying system. The sequence of bases matters, the structure matters, the ability to replicate matters. None of that comes from simply having the molecules present. What we are seeing in this study is not life, but chemistry. Okay, not just any chemistry. It's a very specific kind of chemistry actually. These are not random organic molecules. These molecules play a direct role in biological systems. But the thing is, they are forming naturally in space without biological process. And that tells us something really profound. The building blocks of life are not unique to Earth. They are a natural outcome of chemical evolution in the universe. This changes the question we need to ask. For a long time, the question was, how do you go from simple chemistry to complex molecules like nucleobases? But now we know that step happens naturally. So the real question becomes, how do you go from those molecules to a system? How do you go from chemistry to information? How do you go from molecules floating in an asteroid to something that can replicate, evolve, and eventually become alive? This is where we still do not have an answer. This transition from chemistry to biology is not just a matter of having the right ingredients. It's a matter of organization. You need the right molecules in the right place at the right time under the right conditions, interacting in the right way. That level of organization does not seem to emerge easily. But things get interesting from an observational perspective, because this study suggests something very specific. It hints that environments rich in ammonia may influence how these nucleobases form. Not necessarily whether they form, but which ones form and in what proportions. We now have an example of a system where all of this exists. Our own solar system. This is where all of these ingredients came together at least once. We have asteroids rich in organic chemistry, we have environments where ammonia is present, and we have a planet, Earth, where life eventually emerged. Now, this does not mean that ammonia or asteroids directly caused life, but it opens up a possibility. Maybe the next step is not just searching for habitable planets, but for chemically favorable planetary systems. Places where molecules like ammonia are abundant. Regions where nitrogen-rich chemistry can evolve over long periods of time. Systems where the same ingredients we see here might also come together. Because if ammonia plays a role in shaping prebiotic chemistry, then these environments could be natural laboratories for the early steps toward life. Now, this does not mean we are going to detect life, and it doesn't even mean these environments will produce life, but it gives us something much more concrete to look for. Not biology, but the conditions that make biology possible. In other words, instead of asking, where is life? We might start asking, where is the chemistry of life most likely to emerge? So what this discovery really shows is something subtle but extremely important. The universe is very good at making the ingredients of life, but it's not obvious that it is good at making life itself. The bottleneck for life may not be chemistry, but organization. And that raises a new question. If the building blocks of DNA are everywhere, if the chemistry needed for life is common, then why isn't life everywhere? Why don't we see clear evidence of biology beyond Earth? This is where the conversation shifts from chemistry to something deeper. Because maybe life is not just a chemical inevitability. It may require a very specific set of conditions that are much harder to achieve. Or maybe it requires processes that we still don't fully understand. But at least now we have removed one of the major unknowns. The basic molecules needed for life are not rare. They are part of the natural chemistry of the universe, but we still don't have DNA outside Earth. So no, this discovery is not evidence for life, but it might be something even more important. Maybe somewhere under the right conditions, those molecules might come together. The question is not whether the ingredients exist. The question is whether the recipe ever happens. Thanks for watching.